when you realize that I can't keep this all in, just think about that loved one. Your loved one will never want to see you sad or lonely, or that the person you love wants to see you happy. So when you think about that, you start looking for ways to offload and to live your life.
You're listening to Life After Losing Mom with me, Kat Bonner. On this podcast, you'll hear from other women who have lost their mom and discovered the exact coping strategies you need to get through the day and be in the best place you've ever been. Don't miss another episode of Life After Losing Mom. Subscribe today. More information can be found at katbonner.com/podcast. And if you'd like to join a group of like-minded women, head to Facebook and search for the Life After Losing Mom community.
So I lost my mother when I was 10 years old. So it's been 16 years now. And she and my father died in a car accident on the same day. So, I think that was when my life actually started. When things went left, and really left, because, I mean, you can imagine you're left all alone. It's been tough, though I'm in a great place right now. But losing my mother and my father was probably the hardest thing that I ever went through. And it sort of made me the person that I am today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've lost my mom and I know how hard that was, but I can't even imagine. Bless your heart. I am so sorry for your loss. Your mom and your dad on the same day as a 10-year-old. Like,
yeah.
Dang, I thought 18 was young, but that probably just rocked your world for sure. Thank you for sharing. So let's see. Were you an only child? Like, what, happened, like, I guess immediately in the aftermath? Like, who'd you go live with, that sort of thing?
Well, I have two sisters. I'm a middle child. And right after my parents died, there was an uncle, so my mother's younger brother, who came to live with us in our home. And that was for about 2 years. There were cousins, older cousins, who came in and out, sort of like take care of us, because my younger sister was really young. She was 6 years old. But yeah, for 2 years, it was my uncle and a few cousins who came in and out of our lives. But then when I was 12 years old, that's when things went from bad to worse, because my parents were from the Congo, and we were sent back there. Well, just me and my younger sister. My older sister had a whole nother struggle of her own. So we went to live in Congo with my extended family. And that's where we were beaten, we were abused, we were starved. I started working from the age of 12 years old just to put us through school. I remember going days without anything to eat, and not because my family was poor or anything, but because for some other reason they didn't love us, I guess. Imagine living in a really big house where there's a chef, there's a chef, there's a driver, there are vehicles, there's everything, but you're not allowed to have any food, any water. It was really terrible. It's such a long story, but when I was 18, I took my younger sister and literally walked out the door and never looked back. And a whole new struggle started. We were homeless for a while, again with nothing to eat. It was terrible. I can't begin to explain how terrible my childhood was. But so that's sort of how I grew up in a nutshell.
Wow, bless your heart. I am glad, the person that's coming to my mind is, I'm glad that you're not an only child, because that is literally just unfathomable. But yeah, so how was it, like, were you close to your parents? Like, how was, like, your family dynamic growing up, even with, your siblings?
Oh my goodness, I think we were a fairy tale family. Everything I remember was just perfection. I know nothing's perfect, but it was just, there was never dull moments. My parents were so involved, so loving. Just as a parent now, because I have a daughter now, a little baby, and I, I just can't. I think about the way my parents loved me, and I try to imitate that because it was just so warm. Like there wasn't a single moment that I felt unsafe, that I felt unloved. Um, they would they were probably the best parents, and I'm a little biased, of course, but it was awesome with my sisters. Everything was really great. So losing them was an extremely traumatic event for us because we were used to that family unity, that love, spending long evenings together. I remember watching cartoons with my father. I remember reading books with my mother. She loved reading, and I got my love for reading from her. And I remember my mother teaching me, I don't know, like ladylike things. I don't know. She was really dainty, and she would dress us in like all the same. Like we were years apart, but like she enjoyed having her daughters. And so yeah, losing her, I think, was probably the biggest shock because yeah, she was our everything. She was literally our everything.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that. Like, I'm not very familiar with, the culture in that part of the world, but if it's anything like I'm thinking, it's very much so, the woman is, a lot like the caretaker. And I mean, I'm sure it was different for you losing your dad than it was losing your mom,
Yeah.
but especially in a mother-daughter relationship where the mother is the caretaker, regardless if she has a job or not, I think that's what makes it so like impactful.
Yeah, definitely.
As a daughter or a child. And like I know it sounds cliche, but like you were in your mother's womb. Like like it's like actually like, and I'm not saying you can have more than one dad. That's going to sound terrible, but like you literally only have one mom.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I guess that's just the way that I look at it. So where did how did your siblings react? Did they, you said you're the middle. So was one predominantly older than you, or did y'all support each other after your parents passed? How was that dynamic specifically?
it was odd. I mean, death can do things to you. My the firstborn, she's 5 years older than me, and she went through a period of anger and solitude. So she was really reserved. I think losing our parents just it clicked something in her mind, and she was really she just didn't want any interaction with anybody, and including her sisters. But weirdly enough, for my younger sister, who's 5 years younger than me, it became sort of like a mother-daughter relationship. I remember at my parents' funeral. So I don't know if they do this on in your side of the world, but when someone dies, you have to. I mean, there's no getting around it. You have to view the corpse, So as young as we were, we had to do that. And I remember staring down at my parents' bodies and telling them that I'll take care of your daughter, meaning my younger sister. So I think after their death, with my older sister, she became really distant and our relationship was sort of strained. But with my younger sister, it really became mother-daughter. I literally became her go-to for literally everything. And it's the same today. It's the same 16 years later.
Well, good. I'm glad that I love the first thing that is coming to my mind once again is you're saying, hey, death changes people, and it 100% does. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And I think I don't want to make assumptions, but it almost seems like, since y'all were younger when this happened, that y'all were all each other had. And, I know, I think when siblings are older, and they're not living together and they're off doing their own things, they might not be as comforting
Yeah.
when someone passes.
Yeah.
That's just my personal, outlook on that. But yeah, did they have like similar feelings about like your parents passing that you did, or did you feel alone in how you felt? Like, was it comforting knowing that they were going through the same thing you were going through?
I honestly think as individuals, we all processed the situation very differently. I really didn't get the chance to speak about it with my older sister, but my younger sister, being so young, she was 6 years old when they died. She had just turned 6 a few days before the accident. She understood that they had died, but at the same time, she didn't. I don't know if that makes sense. So for her, her experience was completely different. I know that she felt alone as well. Um, um, I don't want to take anything away from her grief, but I feel like I had no shoulder because I lent her mine, but on the other side, I didn't really have anyone to turn to. She was so young, so I couldn't offload what I was feeling onto her, whereas she could do it with me. So I think each of us sort of experienced the whole tragedy in really, really different ways. And for me, I was telling you when we were talking before the interview that I felt completely lonely and unsafe. I felt terribly unsafe, and that's the biggest thing I struggled with.
Do you think like that feeling came from like not having your parents there? I mean, I know it sounds cliche, but there's like an old adage, and people say like parents are there to keep their kids safe, and that's what's going through my mind. So I would love to know like where that, kind of came from.
Well, yeah, so I totally agree with you. I mean, they say that your parents are there to keep you safe. They're there to support you. They're the first people that you run to when you're young, even when you're older, when there's trouble. For me, I think because I was so close to my mother, she was literally my everything. She worked full time, but she was there. Like I don't remember a single moment feeling as though she was not around, even though physically she traveled a lot for her job, but we were just so close. And when she died, I felt vulnerable. I felt like anybody could harm me, whether it be physically, emotionally, and that actually happened. When she was around, I felt like everyone had sort of respect for me as a human being, though I was a kid. But when she died, I felt exposed. I almost felt as if I'd been ripped of all my clothing and that I was standing in the snow with nothing to protect me. And that amplified as I grew older. When you become a teenager, there are so many things that happen. Of course, aside from the changes in your body, but just mentally and psychologically, you need that person that you can run to. And for me, there was absolutely nobody. And that made me feel insecure. I didn't know who to turn to for certain things. And I think that's where that unsafety came from. The fact that she was gone and now I no longer had my confidant. I no longer had the person that I'd run to for everything. Now I found myself literally with nobody. And that's where that feeling of loneliness and unsafety came from.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and there's always going to be some things, that you tell your mom and that you don't tell your dad and vice versa. But I mean, at the end of the day, when especially that young, oh my goodness, like death is a big, big thing and it can literally rock your world. But when you're faced with it, it's like a double whammy at that young of an age. I mean, how can you not feel that way? But I guess like my next question is at what age did you start to like find some comfort and like feel not lonely? I don't really know how to word that. Yeah, like was there a certain age? Was there like an epiphany? Like, I mean, obviously grief is ongoing, but yeah.
Yeah. I think for me, when things got really, really tough, I think around about the age of 13 or 14 years old, I found an outlet. And for me, not bottling things up was the biggest relief. And I would write, and I'd write letters, especially to my mother. I wrote to my father as well, but I'd write to my mother. I know it sounds really weird, but I'd write letters. At the lowest of my lows, I would write letters to her. I'd ask her for advice, although obviously there was no return. But just letting that out, that was the first step for me, to me not feeling as lonely as I had before. And I think the epiphany, or like that ta-da moment for me was, I think around the age of maybe 20 years old, so not really long ago. Things were really, really tough for me. And I remember sort of hearing my mother's voice, and I know it's so strange, but maybe you can relate. It could have just been my subconscious, but I could hear her sort of comforting me. And it's at that moment that I told myself that even though she's no longer physically here with me, just thinking about her, looking back at old photographs, thinking about the way she comforted me, the way she fed me, the way she clothed me, those old memories were her presence in my current life. So as soon as I realized that she may be gone physically, but that love that she has for me and those beautiful memories, those never died. And I think that's the moment where I started feeling better. Although, like you said, grief is a process, it sort of never stops. But at least for me, that was the moment that I felt better. I felt better.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important to find your outlet. And people think it's weird. They're like, oh, like you talk to your dead mom. I'm like, okay, first of all, it's not that weird.
Yeah.
Because, like, I'm not saying if you believe she's alive, because that's obviously not true. But people carry on their loved ones' memories however they decide to do that. And yeah, it's really special to be able to do that, because like you don't, and I think sometimes it happens by accident, like you start writing or you start looking through pictures or, whatever you do just to remember things, because as you grieve and as time goes on, like there's just certain things you forget. And when you like try to remember those things, you're like, oh my God, like this is so helpful. Where has this been my whole life? Like, and then how it helped you and how that really fostered your how it improved your loneliness. Like you almost feel them, Did that happen for you, or was it just kind of gradual?
Literally, like it's just, I don't know, it just sort of happens. It's not really gradual, but one day you just sort of, I don't know how to explain it, but you feel a strong presence. And I think, like you said, it's those memories. You're like, wow. I think for so long, the memory that I had stuck in my mind was finding out that my parents had died. And for so long, that's the memory I carried with me. But the moment I started looking back at happier memories and how beautiful my life was with my parents and how loving my mother was, I think that was that moment that I started feeling warm inside. And it started, I think that the hole is never really filled, but there's a feeling of sort of joy. You're not happy that they've passed away, but you're happy that you got the opportunity to get to know them and to live with them, and you got the opportunity to build a relationship with them. So I think, yeah, it's just it just happens, sort of. There's nothing, you can't control it, but it really just happens.
Exactly. Okay, that's what I was thinking. I was like, I bet it was like accidental. And to hear you say that it was like, okay, like I'm not crazy for thinking that it was almost accidental. But yeah, it's like crazy to see how, you can improve sometimes without trying. So did you like get into blogging, in your 20s, or how like was that just a way that you coped with your loneliness?
Well, it started off by when I was 18 years old, I decided to write down my story, and it was just for me. I just needed to like let it out because it was so heavy. And my husband now, back then he was just a friend. I had given it to him to read. I'm like, here, I felt bad one day, and I literally wrote down my story. And he read it, and he said, you could help a lot of people with this. You could help yourself feel better, and who knows who else you could help. And that's where it all started. I started blogging, I think I was 19 or 20 years old. And it just felt really good. Like, I really didn't care if anybody was reading it, but it just felt good to pour my heart out. And that's how it all started. And I haven't stopped since. I'm a lot busier now, but whenever I've got the time, it just feels so good to be able to write down my memories or my struggles, or how I'm feeling on a particular day. I love Mother's Day and Father's Day. It just feels good. It feels good.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not like you're the only one who's going through this. I'm sure your blog is helping other people, and to realize that it's helping you to get it out and to help other people, that's almost a coping mechanism, so to speak. Do you think that blogging still helps you not feel lonely? Like, do you think it's a way that you maybe cope with your loneliness now?
Definitely. And, weirdly enough, it's funny that you ask, but whenever I blog, it's when I'm feeling lonely, or when I'm feeling low, or when I really, really miss my parents. That's the moment where I feel the most inspired. And when I'm done typing, I just feel like, oof, like a whole load has come off my shoulders. So yeah, it's weird. It's been 16 years since my parents have passed away, but just writing about them, and I write a lot about my mother, it just, it helps me with the loneliness. It helps me whenever I feel unsafe, or I feel like I've got no one to run to, and I write about it. It just offloads a huge load off my shoulders, and I feel rejuvenated, I feel refreshed, and I feel warm again, if that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. That's so funny that you say that, because I think sometimes, we don't always know the reason, like, we might not know the reason why we blog or why we do X, Y, and Z, but once you do some self-reflection, it's like, wow, when I'm feeling this type of way, I blog or I do this. And like, that could literally be like, for you, like, you blog when you're lonely. Well, that's crazy. Like, if that's the main thing that you've struggled with, really. And like, yeah, it's crazy how powerful, that outlet can be. And I think sometimes, as like we get used to grieving or that sort of thing, that we almost forget why we do certain things. So it's definitely important to like do some self-reflection and realize like, I'm doing this. But the fact that that like you blog when you're lonely it's so crazy. Like, how does that make you feel? Like, does it make you feel unlonely that you blog when you're lonely? I don't know if that made any sense, but does it still like make you feel alone? Like, yeah. Do you get what I'm asking?
I get it. Yeah. I think for me, every time I blog, this is going to sound really weird, but I guess this is how my mind and my heart processes things. Every time I blog, it's almost as if I'm telling my parents the story. Like, I'm telling them, this is how I'm feeling, or this is what I'm going through. It's sort of like, how do I explain this? It's so strange. Whenever I'm writing, I sort of feel their presence. And I guess that's why subconsciously, when I'm feeling really like bad and really, really lonely, and I grab my computer and I start writing, it feels like they're there. It feels like I'm telling them a story. It feels like I'm a kid again, running to my mom. Mom, this is what happened. This is how I'm feeling. That's sort of what writing does for me. I don't know if that makes any sense whatsoever, but yeah, that's how it takes the loneliness and it turns it into warmth somehow.
Yeah, no, it definitely makes sense. It's just kind of like your writing just manifested as you began to grieve in a sense. And like, that's how you started to cope with your loneliness when you were younger. Like, you would write your mom letters and then that turned into blogs. So do you think that maybe like as you continue to grieve and get older, that it might turn into like a book or a journal or anything like that? Like, do you see your writing manifesting in a certain way?
Definitely, most definitely. I'm actually working on a book right now, because becoming a mother myself, I had my daughter last year. It made me really miss my mom because I think anyone who's had a kid knows that you sort of like, even if you've fallen out with your mother, but once you've got a kid, you sort of feel like you really need your mom. Like, and I was, aside from my husband, of course, I felt alone. Like I didn't know who to go to for advice. And that sort of clicked in my mind. And I decided to document my journey, my pregnancy without my mom, basically, and having my daughter and just raising her and sort of document how that's happening for me without having my mother to go to for advice. So yeah, definitely blogging has turned into journaling or, potentially a book as well.
Okay, good. I'm glad that that wasn't crazy for thinking that. Do you think that like you'll probably always turn to writing, you know, as a coping mechanism from feeling lonely? Like, is
Yeah.
writing just your thing?
Well, it's weird. I think people who haven't really experienced, and you might agree with me with this. I think people who haven't really experienced that level of grief will sort of be like, "Well, just get over it." But I think those who have, like yourself, you know that you don't really get over it. You learn to live, and you live a happy life. Of course, I believe you can, and I do. But I think that there's always moments where you feel that emptiness, and because of that, because I feel like it will never completely end, I do feel like I will continue. At least from now, looking from now, I feel like I will continue writing because it really helps me. And it may be once a month, it may be once a year that I feel sad, but whenever I do and I turn to writing, it makes me feel good. So I feel like it'll be a part of my life forever.
I mean, exactly. Grief is never ending. So
Yeah.
if you find a coping mechanism that works, may as well just continue doing it. I mean, it's not like you're going to stop, you know? So what like advice do you have for people who, are having like a specific facet of grief that they're struggling with and they're trying to figure out ways to cope? Yeah, what advice would you have for them?
I think the biggest thing is when you internalize everything. And I think we all go through a phase where we feel maybe completely alone or we feel completely not betrayed by life, but completely let down by life. And I think at that moment, it's really, really important to find a way to let go, to express yourself in a positive way. Because when you keep everything bottled inside, I mean, it could be, I don't know, you may be like baking or you like doing makeup or you like running or whatever it may be, you need to find a way to let go and outlet. Because if you keep internalizing everything, that can be really, really detrimental to you, not only physically, but mentally, emotionally. And I think when you realize that I can't keep this all in, just think about that loved one. Your loved one will never want to see you sad or lonely, or that the person you love wants to see you happy. So when you think about that, you start looking for ways to offload and to live your life. And I think that's priceless. Just think about the person you love and remember that that person does not want to see you in a bad way. And learn to live again, learn to smile again, learn to let go. That's what I can advise.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree. And I think it's also important too to realize that it's very much so like coping is very much so a trial and error process, and like it takes a while, and what you might have liked to do before this loss might not be what you like to do now. So like I always say, try out a bunch of things. Like if you used to be a writer, try writing. Like if you're a singer, try singing, try talking it out. I mean, eventually the more like coping mechanisms that you try, you will find something. And I think that this world has like put this idea in our head that the only way to like express your emotions is by writing and talking. And I'm like, that is so false.
Yeah.
Like, so false, and it doesn't always work for people, and I think that's where they really get stuck. And I'm like, first of all, that's not true. So like look up other ways, try other ways, and also be patient with yourself because it's not easy and it's not long, and it breaks my heart to see people get so like frustrated at themselves like this isn't working. And I'm like, well, like you just like be patient. What do you think about that?
Definitely. First of all, I completely agree with you because it's not writing or I don't know, singing, or those are not the only ways that you can let go. There's so many non-verbal or not physical or I don't know, there are so many ways that you can just, so many outlets out there. And another thing is that you should never be you should be patient with yourself. What I'm saying is that there's no time. That you shouldn't tell yourself that after a year, I should be good. Or it's been 5 years, what's wrong with me? Or, oh my goodness, it's been a decade and I'm still crying over this, because you will cry. We're human beings. We're emotional beings. And I think, be easy with yourself. It's not on the first try that you're going to feel so much better. And everybody who has made it to the next step of grieving, if that even makes sense, always has times where they feel bad, and that's completely normal. And I feel like people should stop blaming themselves, or should stop judging themselves for feeling bad, because it's normal. You've lost someone you love, and there's no amount of time that can make that untrue, if you know what I mean. So you've lost that person, and that's forever. So if you feel bad after 50 years of losing a certain person, it does not make you a weak person. It doesn't mean that you haven't succeeded in grieving positively, if that makes sense. So I think people shouldn't be so hard on themselves.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's just a matter of trying to figure out ways. Like, it's just a matter of trying. Like, trying is not easy, and it's scary, and it's like daunting, but I mean, eventually you will figure it out. And when you do figure that out, like what your outlet is, oh my word, it literally changes your life for the better. And you're like, oh my God, there's hope in the world. Like, I'm okay. Like, I can do this. So is there anything else that, you want to leave with the listeners, just about any grief-related topic, basically?
Yeah, just one really last thing. The last thing, and it really depends on a person's beliefs. But I think the biggest thing for me that has really, really helped me, aside from, of course, finding my outlets, is just the realization that love that my mother had for me, that didn't die when she died. I honestly believe that love is not something that can just die when someone passes away, and that's a sense of comfort. So I think when you remember that that person loves you, that person loved you, and you remember that their body perishing doesn't take away from the fact that that person loved you, it's like a sort of comfort, at least for me. And just thinking about her love has been beautiful. Just remembering that she loved me, that she nurtured me, that she cared for me, that's just been beautiful. So yeah, holding on to beautiful memories doesn't make you weak. It's actually a really, really positive thing, in my eyes at least. So yeah.
No, you're very right. And I love that. You hit the nail on the head. I literally could not agree more. So where can the listeners find you and your blog?
Okay, so my blog, they can find me on www.stellampisi.com, and that's Stella, STELLAMPTISI.com. And yeah, all my social media links are on there, and my blog's there. I'm as raw and as honest as I can possibly be. So yeah, that's where they can find me.
Okay, cool. And you do like life coaching and grief coaching too. They can find all that information on your website?
Definitely, everything's on my website, and I love to chat. So
perfect. Yeah. Okay, and I will make sure I put that link in the show notes as well.
Awesome.
But yeah, thank you so much for being on the show. I loved getting your input. You're the first guest I've had that has lost both their mother and their father, and oh my word, on the same day. It's so nice to get different outlooks, obviously. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed it.
Definitely. And thank you so much for having me. Just speaking actually feels really, really good. Hey, I just feel really good. So thank you so much for having me on your show.
Hey friend, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Before you go, I have 3 favors to ask you. First, I wanted to let you know that I host a group for women where we share our day-to-day stories, challenges, and victories. If you want to come along for the ride, head to Facebook and search for Life After Losing Mom Community. Second, if you don't mind leaving me a review and telling me how I've helped you in your grief journey, I would greatly appreciate it. Finally, head to katbonner.com/podcast to access previous episodes and subscribe for episodes in the future.
This has been an OutsourceYourPodcast.com production.